I'm Jonathan Moore. I'm Director of Product Management here at AMAG. This is by far the strangest trade show demo I've ever done, but I appreciate everybody joining and taking the time out. I think this is a great idea to bring the trade show out to everybody remotely. It's kind of the best we can do under the circumstances. And I think Symmetry Business Intelligence is a great place to start. I'm really excited about this brand new, literally brand new, released officially yesterday product that AMAG is, as I said, just released. This is my first official demo of this deck, so bear with me. But like Chris said, I'm going to take you through this new product. Probably do 20-25 minutes of presentation here, and then open it up to any questions that you may have. Really looking forward to hearing some feedback from everybody and answering any questions you may have on this kind of different, very new product. And it's really a long time coming. It's something that AMAG has been talking about for a while now, is an analytics package to review anomalous activity within the access control system. So without further ado, let's jump in. If I can click the right button, of course. So I always like to start off a presentation with the challenge or the problem that we're trying to solve, right? If you don't understand the problem, how are you going to solve it? So in this case, you know, with the evolution within physical security and within the world in general, we all know data is increasing, right? We have more and more devices that are connected to our physical security systems, more and more panels and hardware and integrations and things happening within our environment. And as we know, that generates data, right? So we have a lot of data within our systems, and most companies realize that there's value within that data. They know that maybe we're not doing enough with it. We're not extracting that full value. We're maybe not sure how to extract that data, right? If you're part of a large organization, we're talking about millions and millions and millions of records of data that are generated. It's just not possible to do anything manually with that kind of information, right? There's really no way to sift through, you know, if you've got 10,000 employees, there's just no way to sift through every single person's record and have a look at where they've been going and what they've been doing within the system. It's not possible. You just don't have that enough time in the day, right? If you add to that integration, which I've already mentioned, sometimes you don't even have access to that other data that might be valuable, right? It might be part of the HR system or part of your logical, you know, IT resources and things like that. And as we know, most people don't even have access to those departments. I can't just go and sift through Chris Randall's HR files and see what he's been up to there as well, right? So it's a case of too much data that I can do anything manually with. And at the same time, maybe I'm not really, from a data privacy perspective and that sort of thing, really allowed to even look at that data in any sort of detail as well. But at the same time, we really want to see what we can do with all of this and maximize the value that could be extracted from, you know, that underlying data that everybody's generating day to day. So that's really the challenge that we've taken a look at, and we've spent quite a bit of time reviewing. I want to take you through on the next slide here a little bit of our journey that AMAG has gone through on this analytics journey, as I like to call it. And it's important to point out. So we've been looking at this at analytics for probably 2 years, maybe even more. And you know, you might not have heard too much about it publicly, but on the back end, we have engineers and really, really smart people that have been doing a lot of research into the reality behind analytics. And I wanted to bring this up because we've really spent a lot of time and effort diving into the details to work out what actually makes sense for physical security. So for example, we partnered with a number of different external experts in the analytics space in order to learn. And we ran a number of different tests and proof of concepts and things. And I'm quite happy to say some of them didn't work, right? We went down certain roads and ended up thinking, you know, this isn't going to work for a variety of reasons. So for example, we teamed up with a team of data scientists, really experts in the space, and we came up with a good solution. But then we realized that it was very, it required a data scientist to actually manage, right? It's very bespoke, and each customer would be a little bit different and would require implementation by these experts and maintenance by experts. and at the same time can also require a heavy sort of back end. The server resources and things like that to process that data really was pretty hefty. And if you're looking at the logical world and you're looking at really big data sets and things like that, that might be something that's useful to a Facebook and a Google and these really large tech companies and things like that. But your average, the physical security world doesn't necessarily have the budget or the expertise, quite honestly, to manage that kind of complexity. So we went down those sorts of roads. We learned what we could, and then we came back and regrouped and looked at other options. And what we've actually come up with is a pretty straightforward, simple to deploy solution that at the same time has a lot of that power that some of those more complex solutions were providing as well. And I think we've done really well to strike a balance with something that can extract real value without being completely custom to each customer and without also requiring huge resources on the back end. So as you can see from the slide, we're talking about a fairly lightweight solution that's not going to require heavy server resources. Will tie into Symmetry Access Control. Is obviously capable of tying into other systems, both internal to AMAG, our portfolio, and external systems as well, which obviously I'm going to go into in more detail in a moment. And then also just important to point out there's the sort of architecture. There's two major pieces to our analytics solution that I'd like you to understand first, because a lot of you may have some questions in this area. So what we have is the underlying, what I like to call the analytics engine, right? This is what's crunching the data in the background and coming up with these insights and things that may be of value to you. That's the analytics engine. That's really the server component that's crunching the numbers. And then we have the data visualization layer, right? Which is Microsoft Power BI is what we're using at the moment to display the data. And that's really where the bells and whistles are shown, right? That's the where you view the dashboards and reports and all the different graphs and trends and things that you're seeing. But that's really, the data is being crunched by the analytics engine, and then it's just a display layer, essentially, that we're showing it in, and that's currently Power BI. I say that because obviously this is our initial release of the product, and we had to choose specific technology, and we did for a variety of reasons. But that doesn't mean we're stuck with the technologies that are in place. So there are possibilities to use other visualization layers if we needed to, and that sort of thing. And then analytics engine is also capable of sharing the aggregated data with other systems as well. So if you already had an analytics system in place, for example, but you wanted to consume the physical security data or the analytics from this, it would be possible to do as well. So I thought it was important to kind of share the sort of architecture at a very high level on how the solution might work on the slide. So at this point, let's actually dive in and take a look at the solution itself and learn a little bit more about that. So to start with, Symmetry Business Intelligence right now is really focused on, as the slide says, the unusual, anomalous behavior, right? So that anomalous behavior is unusual activity within your access control logs and data, right? So starting off, it obviously has a lot of capabilities, but let's start at step one here, and we'll talk about what's possible in future as well. Step one, it's tied into Symmetry Access Control, obviously capable of tying into other systems, capable of tying into potentially other access control systems as well, if necessary. But starting with Symmetry Access Control, we're reviewing the logs, the event data, the alarm data, and detecting anomalous activity. So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. Really what the system is doing is it's looking at each person in the data, and it's building a sort of template for each person, right? So it may look at Chris Randall, I'll just pick on Chris for today, and it sees what Chris is, we're all creatures of habit. What does Chris normally do? Chris is in sales, so he comes in around 11:15 each day, probably leaves about 3:30, 4 o'clock, goes to, his desk and, goes to a very specific set of readers during the day. Now, it will kind of build a baseline on each person of what they typically do. and then starts to flag and show unusual or anomalous activity outside of that baseline. So if Chris Randall suddenly starts coming in on a Saturday, or he starts coming in at midnight, or accessing doors that he does not normally access, we're going to flag that as a potentially additional risky activity, right? So we may raise his risk score in a certain area, right? So I'm going to start talking more and more about the scoring here, right? So you'll see numbers and things being thrown around, but essentially, you know, it's a sliding scale of, say, 1 to 5 right now, where 1 is very low or no risk and 5 is high risk. That scale could be modified and changed if we needed to get more granular. But essentially for now, 5 is a high risk sort of pattern. So what we can do with that is we would essentially assign a score to different readers and assign scores to different time periods and things like that as well. And without getting too technical in the actual setup, we're essentially saying, you know, this reader is a 5 in terms of risk, whereas another reader is a 1. And it's easy to understand, right? Your front door might be a 1 and your data center door might be a 5, for example. And then times of day would have different levels of risk as well. Middle of the day, typically, not in every organization, but middle of the day typically is low risk time, right? If somebody's trying to access the front door in the middle of the day, it's probably not the you know, a very risky period of time. Whereas middle of the night at the data center door, your risk score is obviously going to be much higher. So just at a high level, that's some of the sort of back-end configuration of, you know, selecting certain readers and time patterns and things like that, and determining their level of risk based on time of day and location of that reader. And from that, when somebody like Chris Randall starts acting out of the norms, if he's accessing critical readers at strange times of day, that's going to raise his risk score. And we're going to flag those people to essentially the top of the list. So instead of having to sift through 10,000 different people to see if anybody's acting strange, we're going to show you the 10 or the 20 or the 30 people that have done some weird things in the access control system, you know, over the last few days or weeks or months or whatever it may be over that time, and then allow you to drill into it and understand what's going on, because there could be completely, you know, legitimate explanation. Chris had to come in the middle of the night because the burglar alarm panel was going off and he had to turn it off, right? Or something happened, and it could be completely explainable, but it's still good to know that that happened, right? Because it could be something different, right? So as you can see, I think I've kind of explained the sort of anomalous activity that's going on here in sufficient detail, and we'll go through some examples and things along the way here. But the general idea is review the events and data within the access control data to start with, and build a sort of risk score or just based on that, right? That's sort of step one. If we dive a little bit more into it, on this page, I know the slide is a little bit small here. It's difficult to kind of render on the screen and show you, but if we take this further, there is a what we call a risk matrix, essentially, that can now allow you to tie in a number of different scores and risk settings from both the access control system and also from other integrated systems and things like that, right? So as the slide shows, we have, you know, it could be the other AMAG systems, you know, our incident case management solution, or Symmetry Connect, our identity management solution, those kind of things. We could be pulling data from those areas, and we could be showing, you know, combined what's going on. So the idea here is, you know, Chris Randall is acting a little bit strange within the access control data. We're seeing some anomalous activity, and that points to, you know, it's kind of strange that he's coming in on a Sunday. Now, what if we could combine that with a flag from HR that said Chris just gave his 2 weeks notice, right? He might not have told security that he's given his 2 weeks notice. Security probably has no idea that he's only, you know, got 2 weeks left at the company. But what should that do to your risk score, right? If you've given 2 weeks notice and now all of a sudden you're coming in on a Sunday and going to strange areas, maybe we should talk to Chris and kind of try and understand what's going on here, right? So it allows you to put different pieces of the puzzle together to come up with an overall picture of who your riskiest individuals might be. And I'm going to go into more detail on these different systems and and things that you can see on the screen here. But essentially what we would do is now take the anomalous activity from your access control system and put it together with some of these other systems and come up with a combined sort of total risk score across the organization, right? And at this stage, this is our first foray into the analytics, and we have a number of different areas that we're looking at. I'm going to explain them. But once again, this is something we're still learning and will continue to learn about for years into the future and fine tuning. But I think that the general concept here is pretty exciting, right? To look at who my riskiest individuals might be from this perspective, and trying to understand what's going on there, right? Because once again, a lot of it could just be completely explainable, but you might find something that's not, right? And obviously that there's real value in detecting that sort of thing overall. So with that, let's jump into a little bit of a deeper dive into, say, one person, right? An example here of what we're seeing. So, once again, it's a little bit small. I apologize there, but I can explain the concept here. So basically, we've blown up the matrix, the risk matrix there, and we're showing different identities. But highlighted at the top is Bob Wilson, right? And he's the person we're going to use for just as an example today. And what we have here is Bob Wilson has a total risk score that's relatively high. It's a risk score of 35 is the total, and you can see that over there where the 1 is on the right-hand side. So his total score is 35, and it's based on a combination of different things that are going on. So his anomalous activity is pretty high. It's a 4 out of 5. So already Bob Wilson's been doing some strange things or anomalous things within the access control system for sure, and we'll actually dive into that and try and understand what he's done, why he has a score of 4 out of 5, and we'll look at that. But you can see that there's a number of other things that have flagged for Bob Wilson as well, right? So I'd mentioned things. Each one of these columns that we have, so we have anomalous over here, that's a 4 out of 5, that's his access control activity. Then there's customer and corporate and financial and all these different things that can be different flags from other systems. So things like IP can be intellectual property, for example, and he's got a 5 in that area, and that's because he has access to a lot of source code, things like that, right? So that just flags him as a higher risk individual from that perspective, because he has access to a lot of very company sensitive data. So this is somebody already that we should be watching fairly carefully, just because of the amount of access that they have. They pose a much higher risk to the organization, right? So that's what we're seeing out of IP, for example. Another one that's flagged really high is access over here. And we've piloted this product already with some customers, and one of the initial insights that came out of it almost immediately was, hey, there's a number of people in our systems that have access to everything. They've collected access over the years, or they're part of a department that had a rule back from ages ago that gave them sort of 24/7 access to every location, that kind of thing. And it took us deploying the product to show, hey, look, these people over here have access to everything. And then the organization starts to question, well, should that be the case, right? Can we reduce that access? Can we lower it? So it's really a proactive approach to security, right? Before something negative happened, we recognize, hey, we got a little bit of a gap here. And forgive me, I think I skipped it. Access is actually showing that people have a lot of access within the access control system. So a 5 out of 5 essentially means probably has 24/7 access everywhere, right? So this is a guy that has access to a lot of IP data, is acting strange in the access control system, and has access everywhere, right? So you can start to see how the flags are building up here. But looking at something as simple as show me all the people that have access to everything and allowing me to then determine whether that's valid or not is useful, right? That allows me to close holes within my security that before something negative actually happens, right? If I can take some access away, I think, ahead of time, before somebody goes somewhere that they shouldn't, or something negative happens, That's obviously the goal here, right? Is to prevent something from happening. So that's his access flag that's there. The other one that to the left of it is requests that you see. So we have the, I'm sure most people are familiar with our Symmetry Connect identity and access management solution. And, we could start to tie in data from there where we can say that, Bob Wilson has made a number of access requests that have been denied, or made really strange access requests, or a large quantity of access requests, that sort of thing that can be tuned, where we would pull that data in and say, okay, all of a sudden he's making requests to access to different areas and that sort of thing, and that might raise his flag, right? The HR example that's there, and this is an important one to touch on, is we can get a score from HR. We can have HR tell us that this person is risky, right? That they're a 4 out of 5, or we can have different flags that essentially we know that a score of 4 equals, the potential risk to the organization. But the important part being, I don't have to see his HR data, right? I don't have to go into Bob Wilson's HR file. I'm not legally allowed to do that, but I can get communication from HR where they say, maybe you should be watching this person in a little bit more detail, right? The same to be said for the leaving column that's over here, where this person, if they've given 2 weeks notice, they're going to be flagged as leaving. This can also be used as a possible, where we're starting to feel like this person, has made signs where they might be leaving the organization or something like that. At that point, he might be a 1 or a 2 in terms of risk, right? So I don't want to go too much into the weeds here, but I think you get the general idea that we can take the anomalous access control activity and we can start to look at combining it with other indicators from within the organization, right? To areas we might not even necessarily have access, like HR, and we can get a combined score and flag these people and look at now, who are my 10 most risky identities, and try to understand more about them. And the understanding more about it is really important, and I want to dive into that now, because like I said, this could be completely explainable, or maybe it isn't, but you need to be able to dive deeper and understand where this anomalous activity came from. And that's the next slide. So at this stage, we're seeing another dashboard within the product, and I've kind of highlighted certain areas to try and make them a little bit clearer, right? But this is showing Bob Wilson's activity. So you don't need to be able to actually read the data, but on the bottom right quadrant here it's all allowed ins or denied access, that kind of thing that's going on, but it's all Bob Wilson. I've filtered this for Bob Wilson specifically. So now I'm only looking at his data, right? And then I can filter it and say, only show me Bob Wilson's high risk activity. So show me, the high risk stuff. I don't care about his coming in the middle of the day when he normally comes in. I don't want to see that activity. I only want to see, the stuff that flagged him as being anomalous, right? And that's now exactly what this has been filtered for, is it's showing me all the high risk activity over time. And what I can see is, things like he only came in, he started coming in on a Saturday and Sunday, and that activity was spiking in November. He wasn't doing that in October and September and things like that. So all of a sudden he started coming in on weekends, right? And that's why he's been flagged at the moment. I can see things like his score over time, just down here. There's also a really nice sort of radar feature where I can look across all the different systems at where he sits from a risk perspective, and all of that within the data. So obviously, if you'd like to see more, we can set up an actual demo of the product and dive into the details a little bit more. It's very configurable and a pretty flexible solution in terms of the analysis that we're going to show. But at the same time, I think it's really well built out at this point to show that anomalous activity and make it really easy to drill into and understand what's going on. So at this stage, I'll kind of wrap up and open it up to if there are any questions or anything you'd like to raise at this point. But just, wrapping up with, we've obviously just released the product. We have piloted it with a few customers at this point, and we're continuing to learn from that. But I think it's a really exciting new product that has a lot of potential and is already, we've had nothing but positive feedback about so far. So, everything we do always comes down to cost, risk, and compliance, and this product is no different. It's a pretty cost-effective analytic solution, as you can see. It does things that you just simply cannot do manually. So the elimination of manual tasks through the cost-effective analytics, I think, is pretty obvious. Obviously, we've already talked about concrete examples of how it mitigates risk and allows you to understand the risk that you may face from the existing people within your system. And the other part I didn't touch on too much is the compliance aspect, but the way this can be used as well is it allows you to understand anomalous activity that's occurring, right? So if you have security policies in place that say you have to follow these rules, and then people start acting outside of those rules, you can detect that ahead of something negative occurring, and it allows you to take corrective action, speak to those people, enforce the rules before something negative happens. So that's a compliance aspect. So with that, it is 12:30 on the East Coast. I will wrap it up and open it up to questions, or at this stage, if there are no questions, hand it back to Chris and or Jason.
Fantastic. And we do have a couple questions that came in, Jonathan, so I'll just read these off to you. Some of them may reference a couple slides from earlier in the deck, so feel free to flip back so that everybody understands where the question's coming from. First one, out of all of the feature vectors listed, the red score / columns, what are not entered manually?
So right now, so if we're talking about the different vectors, so the idea right now is the actual analytics is running on the access control data, right? If we deploy that product right now, we'd be pulling in the access control data, running the analytics on that, and scoring it. These other systems, the HR systems and things like that, we have the capability to accept an integration, or a score could be entered manually on the back end at this point. So it's really to be determined in terms of each implementation is going to be different, right? But the system is capable of the integration with these external systems, and we just have to talk through, if we can get that score from HR, for example, then it would be an automated process. But somebody on the back end could essentially manually supply that score as well if the integration wasn't feasible.
Excellent. I got another question here, and if anybody else has questions, please type them in. We've got another plenty of time set aside for Q&A. Question number 2, what happens if the employee requested permission to access the building on the weekend due to a special job? Will this be taken as an unusual activity by the system, or is there a way to inform the system about this?
So the question is a person making a request for access on a weekend or something like that, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So a special request coming in at an unusual time, I guess, would be a better way to say it.
Yeah. So I'm going to assume we're talking about Symmetry Connect as part of the example here. So the idea in general would be that, so an access request that would be made in Symmetry Connect itself, it's kind of 2 parts to it, right? So that could, depending on the configuration, could raise the requests flag that's on the screen over here. So that could be a function of the analytics itself, where that could raise your score. There's also obviously the process within Symmetry Connect itself right now, where there can be approvals and reviews and things like that within Symmetry Connect. So you could kind of get a flag in Connect. And I would talk a little bit about where we're going as well. In terms of our vision for the future, is I see, and we as AMAG see, a lot of potential within Symmetry Connect to more tightly integrate with this analytics package, where things like, if I could tell you as part of the access request and approval process that this person already has a really high risk score, would that not be interesting information to you, allowing you to make a better decision, a more informed decision when you're approving or denying access for this person? So if you're approving access to the data center and this person's risk score is really quite low, not a high risk to the organization, you might be more amenable to approving their access. Versus if you see that this person's really, really high risk score right now, you may want to call them and ask them more questions or try and understand a little bit more, right? So in future, not today, but we're looking at things like that, right? Of how Connect and this analytics product, I think, will more tightly intertwine over time.
Fantastic. And that's all the questions we have listed right now. So, oh wait, one just came in. Do these high-risk behaviors alert Risk 360 as an event that requires follow-up?
So it's a good question. Another event, another thing for further down the road is what I'm trying to say, is in Symmetry incident case management that we're looking at as well, where, you know, initially we've looked at, it's more the other way around to the way the question was posed, is, you know, if I have been involved in a large number of events or incidents, or, you know, I'm a suspect or whatever it may be within something going on in the incident management system, that might raise my risk score within the analytics. We haven't so much looked at it the other way around. It's not a terrible idea of taking that risk score and implanting it into incident management. So maybe that's something we do need to consider. But right now we had it coming, you know, looking at the incident management data and flagging high risk individuals based on the incidents and things that they're involved in within Symmetry incident management.